I am 26 years old. It is the end of 2023. I've come about being an avid reader again for the last 2 or so years after loving reading growing up. And these are my favorite books. It's so extra. So I think my favorite books can be separated into 3 categories. I do them as tiers, really. I do them as like tier 1, which are my like forever and always. They've been around with me long enough that I feel confident in saying that these are my favorite books of all time. Tier 2, which are books that I feel very, very strongly about. I think all of which I've read semi-recently, but books that I feel an innate personal connection to, I would say, for the most part. And tier 3, which are newer books on my bookshelf that I've read within the last year that I'm a little cautious to immediately put them on like tier 1 or 2 because I would like to reread them again before I make that commitment, but that I really, really loved and had a visceral experience reading them. Let's start with tier 3. First, the only book out of this stack that I have gotten to reread so far is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a book that I can absolutely lose myself in. It feels like such a great palate cleanser to read between other books if I feel like I'm in a rut. I love the format in which it was written. I absolutely love and care for the characters, which is the most important thing for me in a book. And it's quotable, and I care very, very much about whether a book or a movie is quotable. This is my favorite out of all the Taylor Jenkins Reid books that I have read. And let me leave you with a quote. This is from Camilla. She says, "I think you have to have faith in people before they earn it. Otherwise, it's not faith, right?" It's too much. It's too much. Camilla's my favorite character. I care so much about her. I think they did her dirty in the TV show, even though I liked it a lot in spite of that. But yeah, I love it. I love it. Okay, next is Motherthing by Annalise Ansley. I still haven't looked up how to say it. Hogarth. There are certain books in the world that I feel as though I have like an invisible string with. And this is one of them. I saw it, it came out of nowhere. I saw it for the first time at a bookstore and I saw this cover and I was like this is a perfect cover to me. There's a lot going on, but I love it. I love it so much. And I thought about getting it, but I'd been trying to be better about buying books and I was like, I'm not gonna do it. And then it popped up on ads on like Instagram for like, I don't know, Amazon, or it popped up on my Goodreads maybe as a recommended book. It just kept popping up different places. I saw like a few people had read it, but it wasn't super popular. And eventually, when I was stuck in a reading rut, I went to Barnes & Noble and I only bought 1 book and decided to commit myself to it. And it was Motherthing. And oh my God, did it pay off. I read it within 1 or 2 days. I was absolutely blown away. This is one of the most theatrical reactions that I've had to a book. I finished it at a Starbucks and I was sitting outside and I was literally like so stuck in my own world. My mouth was wide open. I gasped out loud. It takes so much to get like a visceral reaction like that out of me. And I just absolutely loved it. I was shocked by it. I'm looking forward to rereading this one again because I wonder how much of me loving it was based on the book rut that I was in or what was happening at the time, which I guess I could say for all of these books. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. Right after I read Motherthing, I picked up The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. Another amazing cover. This was another kind of invisible string theory. I picked it up at a Barnes & Noble when it was still in hardback, and I think it had been their like book of the month at some point or something. And I was reading the back and I had recently gotten into gothic horror and haunted house, the haunted house subgenre because of Hill House. And a bookseller, which is the official name at Barnes & Noble, came up to me and said, I have read, I don't know what she said, it was something outrageous though. It was like halfway through the year and she's like, I've read 150 books this year and I am a very avid reader, and that is one of the only books that has ever surprised me, that I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was still in hardback, and I hate hardback and I didn't want to have to pay for a hardback. And so I said thank you and thought about it a lot after she brought it up and really took the suggestion to heart, but I wasn't gonna buy it at the time. So finally, when it came out in paperback, I decided to go pick it up. And I just, again, that haunted house subgenre has me like wrapped around its pinky. I love it so much. I think that this was written beautifully. I think to the fault of being a little confusing at times, but I absolutely adored this book and I cannot wait to reread it. This might be my number one of the like ones that I want to reread. This might be it. I'm trying to find my favorite quote, which I feel like really explains the haunted house thing for me, but I can't find it because I think at the time when I started it, I wasn't sure if I was gonna like it or not. So I only like dog-eared the pages. I didn't underline or tab or anything. And so I can't find it, but let me see if I can remember it well enough. She says of her main love interest, he had undone her and the house was threatening to scatter to pieces or something like that. And that in and of itself, if you like reading anything like me, like that will be enough to get you to want to read this. Next in the tier, we have a modern classic, The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. This is one that absolutely lives up to the hype. I've read 2 of Jeffrey's books now, and I've loved both of them. I think I just really enjoyed the way that he writes. But I think what's especially good about this particular book is the point of view framework that he does in this. If you don't know, The Virgin Suicide is narrated by one of the boys of this group of boys that was like obsessed with these girls growing up. He lives in their neighborhood, he goes to school with them. And so it gives you this third-party view of what's going on. So a lot of times you're just as confused as he would have been looking from the outside in on what's happening in these girls' lives. But it helps get across the themes of the book so well. It really helps illustrate it in a way that I don't think anything else could have, that the girls' voices were being taken from them constantly and they were never allowed to tell their own stories. And yeah, beautifully written, super fast read just because I wanted more. I wanted to know what happened, and a really beautiful look at life as a teenage girl, especially a teenage girl in the Midwest. So, and last in this tier is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. I have read all of Ian Reid's books now, and I think he's a fantastic author. The way that he creates mazes of plots in his books are just like unlike anything else I have ever read. I had watched the movie first and read a lot about how the movie was very, very confusing, and how the book and the movie kind of work together as puzzle pieces to create a bigger, grander story. So I finally got to the book and I could not put it down. It is so confusing in the most intimate, beautiful way possible. I still cannot put my finger on how Ian Reid gets across some of these ideas and plot points and what's happening in the story without just telling them straight out. And while you're so confused the whole time you're reading it, it is just unlike anything I've ever read. I cannot wait to reread it, and I've been told, one of my friends has read it this way, that you can read the chapters backwards in the book and that it basically tells the same story, which is fascinating to me. So I would love to do that at some point and rewatch the movie as well, but yeah. Tier 2. These are the books that Most of them mean a lot to me personally. I can remember exactly when and where I was when I read them, and I love suggesting them for people to read, but these are more personal picks. We're gonna start with one I have talked about many times. It is Slow Days, Fast Company, The World, the Flesh, and LA by Eve Babbitt's. And I read and reread the first couple of pages of this book, which is creative nonfiction, several times. Jaw on the floor, called my best friend, because I have never read anything that felt so personal to me. I am not cool enough to be Eve Babbitt's. I say that every time that I try to explain this book, but I feel a very personal connection to her life as a romantic and how she viewed not just her romantic relationships, but cities, for instance, the way that she explains LA, or the way that she just explains her living her life and growing up. I absolutely love this book and feel such a deep connection to it. But yeah, I would dig into anything by Eve. Next is The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. I had always been so intrigued by this movie, but I quite honestly didn't know that it was a book series. I read this was my very first read of 2022, and I will read anything by Miss Highsmith. I'm hoping to read all of her things at some point. She has so much respect and empathy for her characters, and you can feel that in every page. On top of the fact that she's just a beautiful writer, this book is so philosophical and such a psychological study and a thriller, and I could go on and on. I'm on the third book of this series now, and I enjoyed the second one just as much. I think she's just such a modern writer for her time, and she was so unafraid to just say things. I know we've been talking a lot about perfect book covers. You'll notice that that is a tendency of mine. Book covers and titles of books mean so much to me. This cover is phenomenal, and it is so hard to find the rest of the series in this style specifically, but I want all of them so badly because this is perfect. This is a standout book cover. Love. The most impersonal of this stack of books is Lolita by Nabokov. I know people get so much flack for saying that they love this novel, but my favorite books and my favorite movies and TV shows are the ones that sit you in the gray areas of life, that aren't afraid to step away from the black and white of just like, this is really good and this is really bad. And obviously the plot, what happens in this book is just bad. That's not a gray area of life. But what is a gray area of life is being able to read something that at times is so difficult to read, but also seeing that it is a beautiful book that is trying to teach us things about humanity and about how people think. I've only read this one once, but I would love to read it again. And I don't know, I wish that more people would try to read it, because I think there are some very important things stuck between the nasty bits of this book. Another invisible string book, The Faces by Tove Ditlevsen. I still need to figure out how to say her name. But I had always wanted to read the Copenhagen trilogy, but it was just a little big for me to just jump into. I was always very intimidated by it. And I saw this little guy at a bookstore, and it was just magic. I don't know how else to explain it. It was a magical feeling of being drawn to the book and knowing that I needed it, and I read it in a day. I'm mad that I never had to study or learn about her in school. This was heart-wrenching because it was so honest. This is a study of a woman basically feeling like she's losing her mind, and the way that we work ourselves through that, the way that she uses that frame as creating an unreliable narrator, is absolutely fascinating, and I cannot wait to read the Copenhagen trilogy now. The most personal of those stack of books, maybe besides Eve, is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I first watched the TV show on Netflix. I think that is the best TV show I've ever seen in my life. I think it is a perfect show. The characters, the plot, the Easter eggs, the acting, everything. I think it is perfect. And so I saw the book and I was like, why not? I'll give it a try. I loved the TV show. I carried it around for a while. I moved to LA. I was bopping about for about 2 months out of Airbnbs and seedy motel rooms, and everything I owned was in my little Prius. And I was uncomfortable. I needed something that could comfort me and something that could make me feel better about what was going on. I was chasing my dream, but I felt like I didn't have anywhere to just like rest. And I started reading Hill House. I carried it around in my backpack with me on sets through all of my different Airbnb adventures. I remember very vividly like sitting at a random park that I have never been able to find ever again, and sitting down and reading Hill House and taking videos to send to my friends, reading quotes off, and sitting on the floor in this Airbnb that was just a room that I rented in this giant house. And it was fine, but I was just like uncomfortable. And I sat on the floor and I finished Hill House, and this was the book that made me get back into reading again. I truly believe in being comforted by art, and I felt so lonely and so confused, and I was having panic attacks and I was constantly anxious, and reading Hill House was one of the few things that brought me solace during that time. I owe so much to this book, no matter how silly that sounds. And on top of it, this is also what gave me a new love for the haunted house subgenre. I started reading horror because of it, and I just truly think that there are few things as gut-wrenching as this book, and as thrilling as this book, and as interesting as this book. And I love it so very much. I feel like it will be making its way into tier 1 very quickly. Speaking of tier 1, the first one I'll talk about, which I've talked about a lot, is the Summer I Turned Pretty series by Jenny Han. I would love to make a video at some point about the books that meant so much to me growing up. The series Unfortunate Events was my favorite series growing up. You know, the books that I remember my mom reading to me when I was little, like all that kind of stuff. But this is the one that has carried me from being a teenager into adulthood. I've reread them more times than I've ever reread a book ever. More times than I could count. I'm currently rereading them with these beautiful new covers of books. These books were my hopeless romantic Bible growing up. I grew up with these characters. I was in love with Conrad Fisher. I still am. And I love rereading them and finding little bits of my personality, quirks or whatnot that I had picked up from this series growing up that I hadn't even realized it. The print of these books absolutely like stains the inside of my heart. And so for that reason, they're in tier 1, and I will continue to read and reread them for forever, and hopefully have a daughter someday that I can pass them along to. And yes, Jenny Han, as always, thank you. Second book in my tier 1 is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This book could not be more deserving of being a classic. Oscar Wilde, this is the only novel he ever wrote, and he's so quotable and you hear about him everywhere. But I think that this one got a little lost in translation, at least at my high school. Like, we weren't all required to read it, and I think it gets forgotten about sometimes, at least in the circles that I'm in. And I just wish that everyone read this. It has the best ending to anything ever. How Oscar Wilde came up with this, no clue. no clue. It's extremely philosophical. It dives deep into ideas of nihilism and art and beauty and freedom and what all those things mean. And I just could not say enough good things about this book. And my number one, forever and always, is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. As a foil in a way to Dorian Gray, I think everyone was required to read Gatsby at some point. I think this is probably one of the most popular books to have students read in junior high or high school. I read this for the first time in the 8th grade for a school project. And I think it's also the classic that gets shook off the most as like being the most overrated. But I truly, truthfully think that we were just asked to read it way too young. We had not yet experienced the heartbreak and the trauma and the growing in self-respect and figuring out who you are and the love and the agony and the grief and the desire that is painted in this book. We hadn't experienced those things yet. And I just wish more than anything that people would give this one another try. Gatsby is truly a pillar of my personality. You can ask anyone I know. I own over 110 copies at this point of The Great Gatsby. I collect different covers and different publications of it. I'm a self-proclaimed F. Scott Fitzgerald historian. I love learning about him and his wife Zelda and about the Lost Generation. I've been to one of their old houses in Montgomery, Alabama that has now been turned into the world's only Fitzgerald Museum. I have visited their grave sites in Maryland. I have seen the places that Scott frequented in Paris, and I truly am just absolutely in love with this story and with this author, which seems like it doesn't do it full justice. I think that Scott was so willing to write with the heaviest of hands. He always put his heart and his soul and everything that he was feeling and thinking and going through into his books. And I love that. I love someone that is willing to live with their hearts on their sleeves, and Scott was surely one of the founders of that. This book is so beautifully tragic, so human. It is lyrically written. It's short, but it says what it needs to say. And yeah, this will always be my number one. Let this be your reason to give it another try. So those are my favorite books of all time. God, I'm so happy that I got back into reading, and to be mushy-gushy, just that books exist and that I feel magic. They've taught me so much knowledge and empathy and comfort, and I don't know how to end this video.